All right. Didn't want to waste any light there. Okay, so we can. I think the idea is to consider this idea of humility, epistemic humility, and to consider like what else should we include here? Because at this point in our story, we talk about the fact that our understanding is fundamentally subjective, even though it is in constant coordination with sensory stimuli, which is coming from the physical world and others, which is going to keep it in line with culture and shared knowledge. I should just explain all this stuff. Okay, I want to explore the topic of epistemic humility today. If I were to do a video essay on this, what should be included in it, basically? So, what I don't want to include is the lead up to this type of topic, which is talking about how we end up perceiving the world, which, following our contemporary neuroscience, talks about how we have a predictive brain that is constantly updating its model in reaction to sensory stimuli. The sensory stimuli is coming from what we can consider to be the physical world and other organisms, so we end up with aligned understandings in theory. So this is why we can both notice things that are empirical, and we can also talk with other people, and we can have shared knowledge. It's as if we have a shared truth. However, that, of course, would be only something we could think about theoretically. All right, so, we learn all about perception, what affects our experience in the moment. We learn about what affects our experience over time. So this would be topics such as neuroplasticity and what memory is actually within the brain, and all those fun topics. How we are predisposed in some sense to experience what we experience in each moment, and how that is affected by so many different things, whether it is nature or nurture or what we ate for breakfast. Okay, so we got all that in there. And then so we're finally at this topic of what are the actual practical implications of dynamic model-mediated experience. So once we understand that experience and understanding form a loop, we can begin identifying the places where deliberate activity can... Okay, let's not actually put that there. That's not what we want to do here. Let's hold out on that. I think the first topic to hit there is something like from humility to epistemic practice. So first it would be something like epistemic humility. Despite the fact that our models might be in line with other people and the world itself, the physical world itself, with other people and what we believe to be the physical world itself. There's this fundamental aspect of it that is still subjective, tentative, not absolute, not reflecting something absolute. Oh, I forgot to mention, we end up experiencing a world that seems subjective even though that feeling is afforded to us by affect. That's it, I guess. This is something I should just throw earlier when we're talking about what we learned and perception. Okay. There's this fundamental aspect of it that is still subjective, tentative, not absolute, not reflecting something absolute, etc. This is first the topic that I want to discuss right now. Now, the part after that would be then considering how our experiences nevertheless informative. So this is keeping us grounded to the idea that our experience is still controlled in some sense. So if we were to make an analogy with Anil Seth's controlled hallucination metaphor, this would be honoring the controlled aspect of this. We can recognize that the experience that we have, the meaning that manifests in that experience, would reflect something meaningful or useful potentially. And that's something that we can then leverage. And then the last part of this would be, how do we navigate truth given both the humility and the information here, which could be something like epistemic practices, such as articulating reasons, qualifying claims, checking evidence, distinguishing confidence from accuracy, all that stuff. So first, we just want to talk about the epistemic humility here. And in a video on that type of topic, I would want to honor as many perspectives on that type of concept. So that would include looking at how this has arisen in our culture and our wisdom over time, and then perhaps anything else that you think that should be included in that discussion of epistemic humility. I don't want to give it too much. I don't want to tell it like, hey, I want to look into like Buddhism and stuff like that. I want it to help us out there. Okay, where was the... I felt like I used words. I jumbled some words here. Oh, got it, Anil Seth. Oh, we can recognize that the meaning that manifests... What just happened there? We can recognize that the meaning that manifests in an experience would reflect something meaningful or useful, potentially. All right, let's run it with that. So it doesn't have any idea of anything that we have talked about previously, so it might talk about that type of thing, but let's hope it doesn't. Let's go high. Let's go all the way. So one thing we could do for fun would be watch this video, which is kind of priming the discussion as I just, I just told it like, hey, our memory is afforded to us by neuroplasticity, and it's dynamic. So yeah, it might be beneficial for me to lay out my cards to consider what I know or what I understand, and then see if this video basically says the same thing. So it seems like we experience the world, right? That experience is correlated with activity in the brain. That activity in the brain... Oh, how best to say this? I want to say something like gets registered by the hippocampus, but like what is actually the mechanism that brings activity to the hippocampus here? Ooh. It would have to be something like activity just leads to the hippocampus, and in theory the hippocampus is then going to take that and condense it down, so it's going to be some type of compression of what just happened, and it's going to compress that down, and when we sleep it then fires off, in theory, the same activity, so it like almost decompresses it, and it fires it off rapidly, so it's not in the same frequency as something that we would necessarily experience. However, it fires off rapidly so that the neurons involved, or the connections involved, strengthen. So this would be how these types of connections would strengthen overnight in this case. But this would reflect our memory. So really our memory is then reflected in the architecture of our brain, in the specific configuration of connections and strength and connection strength. And so, you know, come game day, whenever you then think about something or consider something, or even when you're thinking about something that is unrelated to what memory what we're even talking about, the structure of your brain is going to affect your experience in that moment such that something pops in your head, and that something popping in your head might be affected by the strength of the connections that then lead to activity going through those connections and whatnot. So that's as far as I think I can elegantly say right now, and that wasn't even that elegant, so let's see. I'm surprised they changed the name, though. Can we explain your brain in 10 minutes? I think I saw like memory or something as the other name.
Memories are biological magic that enable you to experience bygone moments over and over. With them, your mind can encode, store, and retrieve information about the world and yourself. But memories are not static like photos. Like dioramas made from wax, each time they're under the spotlight of your attention, they can melt and change a tiny bit.
Yes, so the real big idea here is that our understanding or our memory in any regard only manifests itself through experience, so through activity that comes about. So it's hard to like conceptualize what memory actually is when you're not thinking about anything. It only appears pragmatically as you come to have this experience and realize, oh, I remembered that thing. Yo, Energy Dompter, I have a question about the scope of the document. Is modal logic relevant for the document, given you said that logic is relevant for decision making? What constitutes modal logic? Is an extension of classical logic that introduces qualifiers like modalities, specifically addressing concepts like necessity, possibility, obligation, and knowledge. Yes. Rather than viewing statements as simply true or false, it allows formal reasoning about what must be, what could be, and what... Yeah, I think this is like... Once we start leveraging the vocabulary of modal logic, I think that we gain a lot. And so obviously coming from the Hegel wording, the Hegel framing, modal logic is quite beneficial, because then we can start thinking about what concepts require us to do. So, you know, when I'm talking about a pen, it's not about what a pen is, but what I ought to do if this were a pen, if I were to take this to be a pen, almost. And so it's like I ought to use it in a different way, or a certain way. I ought to talk about it in a certain way. And if I were to not talk about it in that way, then I would be doing something wrong in some sense. Now, of course, in order to have this type of view, you have to then open it up to social interaction, such that there's someone who can then perceive what I'm doing as being wrong. Like they can have that judgment on my own action. Now, of course, we can just use this. We can leverage this because it's beneficial for our own self to think about things that way. But, yeah. Yo, Ali Faraher. Faraher. Hi. It goes to Leibniz's distinction between necessity and contingency. Oh, yes. Yeah, so we're not gonna be able to go too deep into like I don't know, a strict formal logic regarding necessity and whatnot. Like, it's more going to be a beneficial way we can conceptualize our own situation. So something like responsibility. Like, what does a certain understanding make us responsible for? You know, if this thing were true, then what are we responsible for doing? And that's kind of the idea of, like, if this was a pen, then I'm responsible for acting like it's a pen. Like, I ought to do that. And if I were not to do that, then I would feel it as being wrong, right? Like, I literally couldn't bring myself to it. That's why this is kind of almost a post hoc, retrospective view of responsibility. Correct me if I'm mistaken, but you reject the hard PSR. What about the okay, what is the hard PSR? The hard PSR. Principle of sufficient reason. States that everything must have a reason, cause, or ground for its existence and truth. Definitely, I would not like that. The soft... Oh, wait, this is the Gale-Pruss weak PSR. The weak principle of sufficient reason is a philosophical premise formulated by philosophers in... Okay, it states that for every contingent truth, it is possible that it has an explanation rather than claiming every contingent truth actually has one. I wouldn't like this either. I would say that I don't want to put the truth in the thing, right? I want to take the truth outside. Like, I don't want to say that there is a truth that could be discerned. It's like truth is manifesting in our perception here. And in our, we could say, in our social coordination, in our communication. So I wouldn't even go this far. This is still in a different type of story. What do we mean by contingent truth here, out of curiosity? Is a statement that is currently true but could have been false. Its truth depends on the actual state of the world rather than on logical necessity. Denying a contingent truth does not create a logical contradiction. Aha. Okay, necessary truth, but a contingent truth. I see. It is possible that it has an explanation. So I like to say that we can explain things in many different ways. So it's not even that there would be like possibly 0 or 1 explanation for something that's true. I would say that you could try to explain something in many different ways, but the thing that you're trying to explain is actually not like an absolute thing. I don't know if this is at all a satisfying answer, but that's all I can give. All right, let's continue here.
Which is a bit concerning because they are a huge part of what makes you, you. They are the personal law a lot of your identity is based on, and the basis for your decisions about your future. What does it mean if they change? And more fundamentally, what is a memory? How is a moment in time stored in squishy meat? Your brain is weird madness. The human brain is the most complex thing in the universe, so we need to simplify quite a bit. Scientific models work, but are not a perfect reflection of reality. It's a bit like talking about elementary particles. But in a nutshell, what makes you think and feel is a complex system of about 86 billion neurons. Extremely complex electrochemical root systems, sending and receiving signals through synapses, tiny gaps between cells.
Synapses? Have I been saying this wrong?
Where an electrical signal is converted into chemicals, bridges the distance, is received, and converted into electricity again. This is how neurons talk to each other. And it's a busy conversation because a typical neuron is connected with up to 10,000 others. Together, they're a network of hundreds of trillions of connections, 100 times more than galaxies in...
And one thing that this might be missing, although it kind of shows it, are recurrent loops. So neurons that are creating like almost like a triangle or something like that, some more interesting system. I think most of these terms have various ways to pronounce, right? Even data or data does. True. Good point.
in the observable universe. From these connections, the magic of your existence emerges. To create purpose in this chaos, some connections need to grow stronger. Whenever two neurons fire at the same time, their synapses change, and their connection gets stronger. They become buddies if you want, and when their buddy calls, they join in.
Neurons that fire together wire together. Now, one thing that this is not mentioning is I might mention in a second, is long-term potentiation, which is where the firing doesn't immediately strengthen the connection. However, it creates almost like a tag on, I guess, on the synapses involved, whether that's before or after the synapse, I don't remember, or it's probably both. And then when dopamine comes through in the space outside of the neurons, that can, I don't know, maybe it binds to the, I don't know how it works, but that affects now change in those synapses. At least that's how I think I understand it. I have to see if that's right. The weak PSR, as I understand it, says that a conceivably different possible world exists where a contingent fact has an explanation, right? Unlike the hard PSR, it is compatible with things like quantum indeterminism. Yeah, I'm not going to be big on those, like the different PSRs here.
If we zoom out, patterns emerge. Dozens or thousands of neurons organize into local columns. These columns are very basic information processing units that process a tiny piece of all the input coming in from your senses, like dark and light, a location in space, how a texture feels, the sound of words, and so on. You have columns for sound, images, touch, etc., all located in different parts of your brain. These columns are the gears of the biological machine that is your cortex. It's the fundamental hardware you emerge from. Everything you see, hear, or feel causes the gears to move, which means your neurons to fire together. But for you to have a coherent experience, these very different gears need to be connected together. Any moment you perceive is made from different parts. As you're watching this video, your eyes activate columns for vision and color in your visual cortex, your ears transmit information to your auditory cortex, language areas are decoding my words, while other networks keep track of your body and emotions. All these signals are processed in deeper areas of your brain that evaluate them, boosting what seems important right now and tuning out what
salient system
doesn't. Vastly simplifying, this concert of all these different gears connected by levers, wheels, and screws comes together to create a new structure within your brain machine, the assembly. A new pattern of synchronized activity within the grand architecture of your brain. This assembly of very different neurons firing together is what gives you the experience of being a human being in this moment. So the assembly active in your brain right now is you watching this video, hearing my voice, and learning about memories.
So the big point that they might, purposely move past because it's rather controversial is pointing out that that type of synchrony is what actually might affect our conscious experience. And I know that's, crazy to think about, but it would be something like instead of consciousness being like a special space in the brain, it's actually a manifestation of all the different parts that they just mentioned being in sync, such that our experience is actually coherent and cohesive in a sense that we're seeing something and we're also understanding what it is, and we also have a language that goes with it, and we might also feel something about it and all that. So of course there's theories about what type of coordination happens within the brain that allows that synchronization to take place. People point to the thalamus, the thalamocortical system, and yeah.
But this is only activity without permanent substance. Like ripples on a pond, nothing will remain. Without memories, you'll be forever trapped in the present. To become a being that transcends time, you need to etch these fleeting sensory inputs, these temporary moments, into something physical that will remain. And how does your brain decide what becomes permanent? With a deadly competition. How to store the past. In reality, there's not just one assembly active in your brain. Your brain can't process everything in the outer and inner world with full attention, so different assemblies are fighting for dominance. The details are complicated, but at any moment, one assembly is winning and deemed the most important by your brain. This is what you're aware of right now. In your brain, the assembly process...
So this is literally the global workspace theory discussed. It's that different signals are competing for access to this global workspace. Now this global workspace is really a way of describing the type of distribution that would affect synchrony across the brain, so that you would have that type of coherent experience. However, depending on what your salient system deems to be that relevant activity, it might end up with an experience that is more visual, or is more auditory, or is something that like an imagination that's going on in your head, and where maybe you don't even see what's in front of you, you're just imagining yourself at the beach, etc. I know, but you haven't provided a counter argument. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, the counter argument would have to be something like the entire perception video I just made. Like, I probably wouldn't be able to do the counter argument briefly in an effective manner. I mean, I could try, but I don't know if I really want to do that right now. I don't know. If you stick with this channel, I'll probably say a bunch of things that add up to my argument there. But you know me. I don't like this idea that there is a absolute truth, right? Even so I understand that these ideas of logic that we're talking about here are culturally developed. So they seem like we've discovered something. They seem like the world is actually constituted by this logic. But I think that what the science tells us is that logic is actually a cultural developed mechanism. It's all about communication, but it also affects how we can think about things. That we then project onto other aspects of our experience. I mean, it's not even like that we're projecting it on. It's like it is now intertwined with how we experience and understand the world. But that doesn't mean that it is part of the fabric of the universe, whatever that would mean. And so, even though it might seem like there is an implied standard here, I don't even remember what PSR means, but principle, even though it might seem like there's these principles of what was it? Of sufficient reason. Like, it seems like we have to find this, this has to be a comprehensive logic of the world. I would argue that that's not necessarily the case. And that we arrive at certain aspects of experience that are actually more complicated than those logic principles or logic framings seem to suggest. As I mentioned, we each have our own subjective understanding of things, and we only leverage communication here to try to keep ourselves in line, like to keep ourselves in some sort of synchronized equilibria of understanding. Now, granted, that's not what we think we're doing. That's not what we feel like we're doing. We feel like there's a truth out there, and that we are actually telling people the truth, and we are understanding the truth. We're learning the truth. And, as I mentioned in the perception video, a lot of that feeling is affected by our biology. And then, this video we're watching right now is affecting what we end up understanding. And when I say that, I mean like what we end up feeling like we understand when we realize that we can pick up a pen and we know what it is, and we can write with it because we've learned what it is, and we know some fact, and that fact affords us a certain thought about what we can do in the world, or what an event means. So it's not as simple as it seems, as it feels. That's one of the main things I argue. So now I would ask for the counter argument there. All right.
Processing the sentence I'm speaking to you seems to be the most active and wins. Your brain thinks this matters, and you're forming a new memory. Two things are happening right now. The neurons of the winning assembly are bathed in chemicals that make them more susceptible to change and tie them closer together, strengthening the synapses between them.
So the other thing that we learned is that even though local activity that remains unconscious can get to the hippocampus, it would be significantly less pronounced in terms of like the effect towards the hippocampus than conscious experience, which would be the signals that the brain deems salient and then thus affects synchronized activity, and that would create an effect in the hippocampus that would lead more intuitively to something being memorized. So this is one of the reasons why as an adult you have to pay attention in order to learn something.
The memory center and librarian of your brain, the hippocampus, is activated. The details here are super complicated and the exact process isn't fully understood yet. But in a nutshell,
oh, thank
your
goodness.
hippocampus creates...
I didn't know the process. the process. I didn't know the process, so I'm glad that they're bailing me out. I understand you believe we don't perceive the external world directly, but that has nothing to do with whether the external world is a necessary or contingent being. So when I say the external world, like I'm including what you're including. How do I say this? Like the idea of logic here is also something that wouldn't be some absolute nature of the world. So even though it seems like when we're playing within the rules of logic, that these rules have to be exhaustive in some sense. They have to exhaust the world. They have to spread across the entire world of truth or whatever. So whether the external world is a necessary or contingent being. So we're already we're already looking in the wrong direction if we're even considering whether the external world is a necessary or contingent being. Or if there is a modally possible world in which it has an explanation. Once again, the world would not have like an explanation. The world wouldn't have one explanation. It wouldn't have zero explanations. You could say it has many explanations, but now we're just getting back to the subjective aspect of understanding. And so we can think about the world in many different ways. We could explain the world in many different ways. There are ways in which we could explain the world that you would say that is wrong, and that's fine. There's many different ways you could explain the world that you would say that was right. But that doesn't mean that the world fundamentally has those explanations. We could theoretically say that the explanations of the world constitute the different like theoretically all the explanations someone could explain about it such that you would end up feeling like that was right. You could theoretically say that, but it's the source of those explanations is not in the world. It would be in the people, the brains that end up generating those explanations, and then it would manifest as apt in your own experience as you say or feel as though that was an explanation that makes sense and is right. So even within your philosophy, logic doesn't reduce to psychological states, but commitments to norms of material compatibility. So not quite. It's that we can, one of the possible ways we could talk about logic. Once again, I'm not acting as if logic is some real thing. It's like we are leveraging these social norms in order to make sense of things. So, right. Once again, Energy Danter, I'm going to say this once a week. I'm going to say it once a day. If you know, just because I'm influenced by these people doesn't mean that I am taking their exact philosophy and running with it as if it's my own philosophy. It seems like my philosophy right now is grounded in the science of the brain and what that would imply, and then we get to start leveraging different philosophers' framings, their linguistic framings, whatever it is. Branham's got one, and we can leverage those for certain pragmatic reasons, but none of them would be like right. It's just a way we could think about the world that might be beneficial for some explanatory reason. Do you not believe that laws like non-contradiction would exist even if there were no conscious beings? Yes, kind of. I don't know what that law would mean. What is the like? No one would care what the law of non-contradiction would mean. In the world, that law doesn't play itself out. I mean, you could argue that laws of physics, like would be there without perceivers. But at the end of the day, the law is the interpretation of just what's happening. And when I say what's happening, I mean like what you end up perceiving. So laws of physics are really interpretations of behavior, of empirical observation, rather than actually being sourced in the world. But it's from our point of view that we are trying to make sense of the nature of the universe, of the physical universe. So you could maybe make that argument with laws of physics. I would be a little more open to that, even though I wouldn't say that the laws of physics actually like exist in some special sense. It would just be that the universe kind of just does its thing, and we are trying to come up with the laws that make sense of the empirical behavior of the universe. Now, when we get to laws of logic, then I would say certainly, like, what is logic when there's no perceivers around, or when there's no human to actually perceive what might be logical, and all you have is just matter and energy just doing things. You just have the laws of physics, perhaps, but you don't have laws of logic. So that's kind of what I would go in that direction. Yo, Darmadon, what's good? If a non-contradiction falls in a forest, true. Now, once again, we feel as though these things exist objectively, as if they would exist even if we weren't there, right? Like, my understanding of a pen is such that if all humans just disappeared right now, this pen would still exist. So that's still a manifestation of my own experience. My brain makes me feel like that's true, and I'm leveraging words that I've internalized and that I've been conditioned to understand. That doesn't mean that it's actually true in the fabric of the universe that this pen would exist, whatever that would even mean. No one cares once all the humans go away. No one cares about this pen. No one's there to perceive it as meaningful at all. Pen is gone. Now this is just matter. This is just matter sitting here. Sitting here is also way too in the weeds of human linguistics and interpretation. All right, laws of physics presuppose the law of non-contradiction and the law. So the reason why you would think that is because, as I mentioned, the laws of physics are human interpretations of what's going on. So they are already structured linguistically in the laws of logic that make up our language. So once again, we could think about language as norms about how we ought to speak and norms of what we can say and stuff like that. So the reason why you might think that the law of physics presupposes these laws of contradiction in logic would be because the laws of physics are articulations. They are interpretations that leverage words to make sense. Like they're already human perceived interpretations. And then you could say that, but what the laws represent is something that's like real. And yeah, at the end of the day, like once all the humans are gone, there's just, and even saying there's just stuff happening is already a little too inappropriate. But there's just matter and energy doing its thing, and even matter and energy is like inappropriate. What like you need a human to discern a pattern within the physical world. The physical world doesn't have patterns without perceivers. It's just the physical world. It's just that. Maybe this is a little Alan Watts pilled, but it's just there. There's no thing. But of course, when we're talking here, we can talk about things and laws and behavior. All right, this is tough though. I'm not throwing this at you expecting that this is gonna like, a light bulb's going to come on. I'm not sure. I have not learned yet what is the proper way to talk about this thing such that it does actually become more of a salient way of thinking about the world. But that's going to be the challenge of this channel that I contend with for the next 4 decades of my life. Hopefully I figure it out within 4 decades. But yeah, I do think that people are very much comfortable in the idea that there is that truth, there is that thing. But when you start looking at the science behind our brains, as we are right now, it shows that the experiences that we have are manifestations of our biology. I think they would still be there. Logos type stuff, part of the original thought of God. Gospel of John, pretty fire for that. Bro, I am messaging Jago right now. To take you on summer break, you need a low cortisol max for a while. Jago actually sent me this video, which has me fired up. Seems like you're getting metaphysical. To say just matter and energy sounds metaphysical to me. Yeah, so the issue with saying just matter and energy is, once again, it's I'm stuck in this terrible position where I have to leverage this language. I'm trying to communicate something to you. And so then I have to say things, right? I have to say like it's just something, and that makes it seem like I'm making a metaphysical case. But what I'm trying to say is that we couldn't fathom what it is, right? That's really the argument. It's not that it's just matter and energy. There's no one there to fathom what is there when there is no humans. So it's not that there's nothing there. It's not that there's something there. It's just that the idea of fathoming anything is something that is only through a human system. So maybe that's a better way of saying it. But I think I've given an effective argument against this whole the metaphysical trap. It's possible to articulate a non-metaphysical move, even though our language is fundamentally metaphysical pointing. It's truth identifying in some sense. There's something fundamentally I don't know what the word would be. I guess I'm still unconvinced that you got out of the trap. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And that could be on me, which is why I'm still learning. But I think all these arguments that I'm making, I'm presupposing so much of the science stuff that we've learned, and I don't want to say that in like a dismissive way or a what's the other word that I wouldn't want it? Condescending way, but I don't know. I do think that a lot of this stuff is, I do think that these are the implications of what we just discussed with perception. Like, it's all there in that perception video. That's like the whole argument of the perception video. And I guess if you were to somehow connect if you were to show that you've now understood the perception video and you connect it to the argument that I'm making, and you say that you've missed something, then I would say, that would give me more of a view of like, I might be off on this. But in my mind, there's like a clear connection between these points, and I just don't know if anyone's I got played so hard today. I tried posting on r/philosophy yesterday, and I got the post got deleted immediately, and I was like, okay, that's a bummer. I guess I'll have to post this tomorrow. So I asked the mod, what happened, why it was deleted, and they said, oh no, I don't know why it was deleted, but it should be up now. And this was like 20 hours after I first posted it, so they didn't even let me do a clean post. So when your post is now like a day late when it's first showing up on the subreddit, it's not going to get any exposure, and the rules of the subreddit said that I can't repost it. So now I've lost my biggest avenue for marketing on Reddit here. I have to sit with this meager 5 points. But I think that's fine. We'll just have to keep doing the ground game. But yeah, I was hoping for more feedback on this video. I just need the feedback. I'm gonna go crazy without this feedback. That being said, I got so much good feedback from my friends. Oh man, and not even just my friends, but I post on the Discord that I chill on usually, that has people that I don't know, and they gave me good feedback, and that was like, okay, they're not even just trying to be nice. These people actually, were just curious, and then they watched and they enjoyed it. So, but yeah, no, the philosophy video, or I'm sorry, the perception video, it's got a lot of the ground of where I'm deriving all these philosophical points. Okay. Do you think science can prove contradictions, or do you believe science presupposes norms of reasoning? I think the second one. I think science presupposes norms of reasoning. Like, this is yet another string of argumentation that we explored in the perception video. That science isn't just something we found. It is something that we've developed over a long period of time in conjunction with logic. And logic isn't just something we found. Logic principles had to be developed over a long period of time. Now, I didn't give logic as much light of day as I gave science, and I think that in the actual document I would want to give logic more time. So looking back at like what were the main logical principles that were introduced in ancient Greece or Rome, and how did that affect the way that people thought about everything, right? These logical principles seep into the culture in ways that are subtle yet crucial, and over a long period of time that affects how people end up speaking. It affects languages. Logic affects languages, such that there's logic now like built into the language, such that when you use certain words, you're making certain pragmatic plays, you could say. You're communicating certain things that have implications on other things, such that if you were to say something, that presupposes or that implies that some other thing is not true. If I say that this is a pen, you know that this is not a dog, or at least I don't think it's a dog. So, yeah. But I am fired up. You are right, Onion Helmet. I am fired. I don't know why I'm fired up. It's probably because I put on this polo. I was like, this is going to be a good one. Let's get going. For the past 15 streams, I've just been vibing like I don't even know anymore. I was up at the crack of dawn looking at the document with my assistant. Got me feeling like Albert Einstein reading through Isaac Newton's notes. I do have to say that the previous version of the document is probably not the most effective thing. And I do want to make it a little bit more accessible. I want to make it all feel like the video essay transcript, the script. Like it needs to be something I could do in a YouTube video where I'm giving it out to anyone. And okay, rather than something like this is the modern scientific perspective, you could say something akin to this is my interpretation of the science and philosophy that I've investigated. That would be more careful. That would probably be more appropriate. It's definitely not the modern scientific perspective, I could tell you that. Even predictive processing is not necessarily the modern scientific perspective. I would say perhaps it's one of the more satisfying perspectives in modern science, but that's also my own opinion. That being said, it seems to make sense of a lot of stuff that people are finding in the brain. And obviously, we just did that whole perception video that explains why predictive processing is rather appropriate for that type of discussion. So, and I'm certainly using logic to make that argument. The philosophical things, I think, are pretty clear logical implications, or like, if this, then therefore we have to take that. It's just that these types of logic or philosophical implications, I think, are just way too controversial or unintuitive. It's really just that they're unintuitive that I think that falls away from people. I think that, it's unsatisfying. Was saying that it's just a little caveat, I think, would be nice in your verbiage. It would be, yep. Though it is pretty fun to be stern. How can we speak about metalogical? Oh, first of all, how's it going? Xeroxel. How can we speak about metalogical things like different deduction systems without using some sense of logic which is coherent? Very good point from the new chatter. I am QQ Lawn, by the way. Very nice. I don't know much about metalogic. I use term meta here as is used, for example, in metaphilosophy, which studies philosophy itself. Stan Richardson be like energy de Hampter. I think that para-consistent logic is dead end. See paper by Slater. Fun of pride, fun of righteousness. See paper by Slater is definitely gonna be a line I use. Fun of pride, fun of righteousness. Fun of passion. Yeah, I do realize I need to be careful about the deadly sins, right? That might come along with being in a, having a certain worldview. And obviously, there's something, something paradoxical about saying that there's only ways in which we can describe something. So, passion is not a dirty word to me, by the way. Yeah. I think the happy medium would be, I want to be assertive in some sense, but the issue is that I always have to be nuanced enough such that it doesn't seem like I'm making some assertion grounded from intuition, merely intuition, which I feel like a lot of philosophical assertions come from. Why assertive? Because I'm trying to push a view for people's own benefit in some sense. This whole document is going to be resting on the idea of our inherently subjective understanding and experience. So I think it is beneficial for someone to understand their own. Yeah, absolutely. Pushing a view is right. When I say view, I don't mean like an absolute truth about the world. It's a view that you can look at the world through. I'm giving them glasses. It's not that I'm pointing to something that's really there. I'm just giving glasses. It just sounds assertive. I'm kidding, but I might use this line on someone. You don't see problems with that. I think that we do that all the time. I think that I don't think there's any problem with it. If I give my opinion on a movie, I think I'm pushing a view. If I were to say that this video was well done, I'm pushing a view. Yeah, everything that I've done on this channel is pushing a view inherently. So I don't see there being a problem with that. I know that obviously things like toxic ideas like gaslighting and stuff like that, I would use promoting a view there. Okay. Well, yeah, maybe it just came down to how toxic the wording sounds, but it is pushing a view. I mean, I don't get much out of the view, right? Like I'm really doing this so that it benefits people. I'm not employed by big subjective experience. You know, I'm not getting a pay cut from I don't know, big Heidegger or something like that. We'll make note of it. Oh, Paraconsistent Logic by B.H. Slater. Big Heidegger. All right, we gotta continue here.
Creates a blueprint saving the rough configuration of the assembly. The assembly is saved and put on an index with all your other memories that are associated with what was going on in this moment. Like every time I was confused by something in a Kurzgesagt video. Finally, you have a memory. An activation pattern of millions of neurons spanning many different regions of your brain. Activating any part of the pattern now makes the whole assembly fire. Now, you're able to relive a moment of the past.
All right, it skipped over the whole part about the fact that the hippocampus compresses that experience down and then afterwards refires off that activity so that it actually then affects the changing in your brain. It's not like the hippocampus holds memories. That's not the way that we would want to think about long-term memory here. If anything, we could say the hippocampus is holding some short-term compression of a experience, and then it's going to fire off the activity that in theory corresponded with that original experience, such that it does strengthen all those connections. And intuitively, we know that this happens at night, so this is why sleep is so important for whether you remember something or not.
That's gone forever in the real world. But this new memory is very fragile and still pretty temporary. Your hippocampus holds its blueprint, but without reinforcement, the assembly will fade and the synapses will be weakened again.
Okay, so it is going to talk through that.
This is why you forget most moments of your life, why you don't remember how your coffee tasted 43 weeks ago on a Monday. You experience most of your life only once in the moment you live it. And you don't just forget what happens to you, you also forget what happens in the world.
Advertisement.
Directly supports our channel. And now, back to your brand new memory.
Oh, very
for the
nice.
past to be truly saved, the assembly needs to fight for its life. There are many ways this can happen. One of them is novelty. If you walk to the bus, listening to some mildly interesting podcast as usual, this assembly's signal is too weak. This moment in time will be lost like tears in rain. But if one day you see a crow and a squirrel fighting over a nut, only for a mouse to steal it, the assembly will fire strongly just for the novelty of it all. Another one is to reactivate the memory over and over after it's formed. Thinking about the animal fight all day and telling everyone about the strange event will etch it deeper into your brain, similar to doing loads of repetition when you try to learn something. And
so I'm guessing etching it deeper into the brain is referring to how strongly the signal is such that it arrives at the hippocampus with more strength in some sense, so it's a stronger signal. And so the hippocampus is also probably real estate that signals are going to compete over in some sense, in some, figurative sense. And so the most salient experiences during the day are going to be the ones that end up persisting until the night, such that they become internalized.
The major way to make a memory stick is to feel emotions. Emotions are really strong mechanisms to guide our behavior that evolved hundreds of millions of years ago. They motivate you to avoid danger, seek out food, and reproduce. You experience this as something feeling good or bad. Whenever you feel something strongly, your ancient brain decides that whatever is going on is important for your survival, regardless if it's wrong or not. So many of your strongest memories have strong emotional flavors. The humiliation when you acted dumb in front of your crush. The joy when you beat your dad at Mario Kart. The devastation when your dog died. The overwhelming love when you held your first kid. If we just made you feel something, we increase the chances that you'll remember this video.
Then obviously there's in more mundane situations, or our usual everyday type of situations, there's also heuristics such as remembering the first thing and then the last thing, rather than things that happen in the middle of some encounter or event. And then there were a bunch of other heuristics that affect what you end up remembering.
Activation, repetition, and emotions do the same thing to your memory. We said before that chemicals made the neurons able to change. Well, now they change drastically. Like wax warming up and melting together, the gears of the assembly grow new teeth to fit more tightly. Neurons grow more synapses and fire together even better. They become closer and more solid. A lot of this happens while you sleep. Your hippocampus replays the assembly over and over, making it more solid and easier to retrieve, which also means that if you don't sleep enough, you literally forget more of your life. Think about that when you have to study for a test next time. Without proper sleep, you'll be wasting your time. But in the end, you have a proper long-term memory. A diorama of hardened wax displaying a moment of your life. A scene etched into a pattern of connection inside your brain. Now, you can remember it forever. Well, why remembering changes your memories forever. To remember, you need a cue for the memory, something that's part of the original assembly. A smell, sound, word, or maybe the image of an angry crow. Your hippocampus searches its index for the cue, hopefully finding the right stored assembly.
So this is a part of the argument of why our understanding is not reflecting something that is like true and static. Every single time we even think about the thing, we are affecting our understanding of that thing. So that's kind of a big deal in terms of the subjectivity of our own understanding. When we feel like we understand something, we have to look at what's actually happening under the hood and what that might imply about what it is we're actually thinking that we're understanding.
And activates it. It fires. Your past experience is retrieved. The diorama appears in your mind and you relive seeing the crow and squirrel fight.
And the other thing that this might skip over, I'm not sure if it will, but it's not like it's the exact same experience that happens in your memory. This is, in theory, a reconstruction. However, of course, your connections have changed significantly since the last time you remembered that thing, and that's going to affect how you understand it and experience it right now. So we can't imagine that a memory is just a replaying of the exact same events. Certain aspects of that memory might even go away, the parts that weren't even salient. And maybe you learn something that actually makes certain parts of that memory more salient than you thought they were.
So far, so good. But as the diorama plays for you, you start changing it. Recalling memories is not like loading a video and pressing play. Under the light of your attention, parts of the wax become soft again, moldable, which means that as you experience the memory in your mind, the neurons involved are bathed in chemicals that make them able to change their structure again. Your hippocampus organizes memories based on a few things, but most importantly, the context of the experience. And the context is now very different. When you formed the memory, you were tired, in a mildly bad mood before work, and very surprised. Right now, you're putting the memory as you're having a night out with your friends and are telling your hilarious story of the epic squirrel-crow fight. And this new context seeps into the memory. New connections form, some synapses are weakened, while others reconfigure. The diorama changes, becomes funnier and more absurd. Not because you wanted to, your brain is just incorporating the new context of your life into the memory. As you finish your story, the light of your attention moves on. The diorama hardens again, now in a new form. The next time you remember the animal fight, you'll remember it as way funnier than when you actually experienced it. And it's the same with all your memories. When you retrieve them, your brain adds new information or forgets some and incorporates your emotions and expectations. In a sense, it updates your past life to fit the narrative of your present life. Over time, even core memories can shift, combine with others, or generate entirely new elements. Your memory system is deeply intertwined with the mechanisms for learning. It was never designed to create an accurate representation of the world. So your memories are updated as you gain new experiences and information. Ironically, the more you remember something actively, the less of the original experience remains. This also means that just because you remember something really well, it doesn't mean your memory is correct. It just means that its assembly is really strong and vivid. It's not a sudden process. Your identity is safe for today. It's a slow shift in the overall patterns inside your mind. You are who you are today, but your future self will be different, and they'll think and feel differently about the things you experience today. This is also...
Though, as we mentioned in the perception video, it's going to feel as though you're the same person, even though these aspects, often significant aspects of yourself, would be changing.
So why therapy can be so helpful. By revisiting hurtful memories in a safe context, ideally with helpful introspection, you are literally changing your brain. literally rewiring yourself to get a chance to be happier. Because yes, your memories may be the law of your life and the basis for your future, but it turns out with some help, you may be able to rewrite your law and be who you want to be.
And that's a huge thesis of this document, you know, playing with your identity in a way where you are trying things out, seeing what sticks, trying to direct your identity or your understanding in certain ways, and seeing whether or not the world pushes back on those attempts. And so in that sense, you are both directing yourself, you're having control over your identity, but you're also finding yourself. You're also figuring out where the rubber hits the road and where you end up actually becoming. So that's like a, you know, that's a neat aspect about it.
And if you want to rewrite the law of your home, new human-made original art prints just landed in the Kurzgesagt shop. Choose a dramatic meteor shower, a tranquil lunar dreamscape, or a powerful volcanic eruption, or even better, all of them. Each print is
even better, all of them,
and set in a matching fluorescent acrylic frame. The sturdy frame is designed to stand solo on your desk or hang on your wall with ease.
It's pretty cool.
When the light hits it just right, it radiates vivid color into your room. Get yours now, and literally.
Pretty neat. Pretty neat. I don't know which one I would want though. Maybe this guy? Meteor one's pretty cool. Okay. All right. Yeah, this was the topic. Okay. Ooh, when it comes to modal logic, do you deny one can consistently conceive of a world different from our world and logical relations about contingency and necessity necessarily follow from that? Whoa. Do I deny that one can consistently conceive of a world different from our world? What do we mean by our world, and what do we mean by like different from that? And logical relations about contingency and necessity necessarily follow from that. I mean, certainly I do recognize that we do have a useful conceptualization of contingency and necessity that we can leverage to make sense of this idea that we can conceive of these different worlds. So if that's what you're referring to, then yeah, I'm not arguing that these are bad ways in which we can think about the world. Like that contingency and necessity don't, first of all, have any coherent basis, nor that they're not useful. I think that they both have a coherent basis and are useful. But when I say coherent basis, I don't mean like they are necessarily some absolute truism, but that they are a useful or coherent manifestation of our cultural development here. Okay, within that inferential system. I'm not sure why assertive would come into it. I mean, there's a million ways to play the game, but I always like just the learning environment here, so maybe I preference open-minded inquiry, while others could prefer something like a debate, for example. Yeah, it's tricky on this channel. Like I'm certainly going to try to teach something. I'm going to try to and when I say teach, I mean like I'm trying to propose, right? I'm trying to propose ways in which you can look at the world, think about the world, such that you can benefit from it. That's kind of the goal here. Now, I guess for myself, outside of the scope of the document, hopefully I would want to push certain ethics as well. So ethics about how we ought to act towards each other and how we ought to act in the world. And those would not be something that the document would include or the scope of what we're trying to do in the document and on this channel, but that's something I'm trying to push. So there are certainly ethics that I'm pushing that I would like to push, that I'm going to be pretty stern about, like, you know, in the Discord. If someone was started being toxic, I would say that yes, I am rather assertive about those norms, those ethical norms. Now, you know, when I'm talking about this stuff, I'm not saying like, yeah, you either got to understand or you got to leave or you got to believe it, or, you know, I wouldn't obviously say that. When I say that I'm being assertive, I mean more that I want to be a little stronger than merely propose on some of these things, right? Like there's this idea of science and logic that I believe that I believe like carries more weight than merely like proposing something. Now, in some cases, I'm not saying that this is like a definite principle, because in some cases, like as I've mentioned with something like religion or spirituality, there, you might believe something that makes you feel great, makes your life feel meaningful, even though it like contradicts certain scientific facts we understand, or scientific norms we understand. And in that case, it might actually be worthwhile that you feel as though your life is fulfilling. And maybe I'm not going to push like, hey, but you're not following the norms of science. But in many cases, I'm going to be looking out for when someone's following something that implies them to do something that I think would be toxic for themselves or for others. So that would be the type of, that's what I'm going to be assertive against, that type of view. I'm proposing something, but if you come in here and you believe that actually the world is structured in such a way where you should go out and you should be mean to other people, then I'm going to be pretty assertive against your point. I'm going to actually care. I'm not going to just propose that you should be not doing that. I'm going to be saying something a little more assertive, like, hey, I think we've got actually a more founded, robust, I don't know, way of looking at the world here that doesn't involve being mean to other people. But I don't know, I'm trying to come up now. Obviously I got to be a little careful, obviously, in the context of the document, not to push certain ethics within the context of that document, but I am going to push assertively those ethics implicitly and explicitly within the context of this channel. Okay, if we use modal logic, are we implying already that that this world obeys modal logic? The thing with logic is that it's necessarily self-referential, in the sense that if there's only finite axioms, then you inherently get outside those axioms to justify them. What was your discussion about modal logic, by the way? I read someone, Kripke, named, but they skip. It's about possible world semantics. Oh, bro, Stan, wait a minute. Quine was more based about modal logic. Yeah. Okay, for example, in this world, gravity exists. In another world, we can possibly conceive of it not existing. Yeah, so gravity is a great example of what I was trying to explain earlier, where scientists don't understand what gravity is yet. They understand its behavior, right? They understand its empirical behavior. So we have laws of gravity. We understand how it affects our empirical observations, but we don't know what it is, right? We don't know like what affects gravity. Now, I guess we understand that mass affects gravity, but we don't understand why. Like, we don't understand what it is at the bottom. So that's an example where, hey, this is really just a pragmatic way of making sense of empirical observation, not us figuring out what is the structure of the, of the ontological world. Okay, Stan, hold on a minute now. When you say another world, you mean our world with different state. I thought that's what I was thinking. Like, there's a world in which I'm not holding this pen, and that's another world, and it's possible that it could happen. There's one where I drop the pen right now. Okay, maybe it's whenever I pick up a pen, I start getting antsy. We'll see. I don't believe other worlds exist in the same sense that ours do. I believe they exist as thoughts in the mind of God. Interesting. Just join. What's good, Reclusi? I see chat about Kripke and now possible worlds. I need a TLDR so I can engage. You have tasked us with something monumental. Yeah, we have covered a lot of ground here. I remember you said you're naturalist and pragmatist on Luminance Bloom Stream. Whoa. I've changed my mind since then. I've become more sympathetic to metaphysics and modal logic. Monumental task versus an immovable onion helmet. I doth have faith. I am strong. And okay life, what's good? Stan, the type of man that would make a spreadsheet for the XXX videos he watches. Jesus. A spreadsheet. What do you need more than a link? All right. You understand that Quine's positions disregard philosophy itself? Show us the spreadsheet. I don't follow his philosophy. What was the reason? Okay. I think I don't know. I don't know why, Onion Helmet, I don't know why you said bro. Hold on for a minute, but I think we're just going to continue. I become convinced that the laws of logic are invariant and necessary in the sense that no matter what state of affairs exists, they hold in the same structure. Okay. All right, so the topic that I wanted to get to here, I spoke a novel into ChatGPT, and then I haven't looked at what it spit out. So I say, okay, I want to explore the topic of epistemic humility today. If I were to do a video essay on this, what should be included in it, basically? So what I don't want to include is the lead up to this type of topic, which is talking about how we end up perceiving the world, which, following our contemporary neuroscience, talks about how we have a predictive brain that is constantly updating its model in reaction to sensory stimuli. And updating its model in reaction to sensory stimuli is the video we just watched. So Reclusi, we just watched a video on memory, the Kotzgazat video that just came out today. The sensory stimuli is coming from what we can consider to be the physical world and other organisms, so we end up with aligned understandings in theory. So this is why we can both notice things that are empirical, and we can also talk with other people, and we can have shared knowledge. It's as if we have a shared truth. However, that, of course, would be only something we could think about theoretically. We end up experiencing a world that seems subjective, even though that feeling is afforded to us by affect. All right, so you know, we learn all about perception, what affects our experience in the moment. We learn about what affects our experience over time. So this would be topics such as neuroplasticity and what memory is actually within the brain and all those fun topics. How we are predisposed in some sense to experience what we experience in each moment, and how that is affected by so many different things, whether it is nature or nurture or what we ate for breakfast. So we're finally at this topic of what are the actual practical implications of dynamic model-mediated experience. I think the first topic to hit there is something like from humility to epistemic practice. This should be like with little tickers or something, apostrophes, to show that it was like a title. So first, it would be something like epistemic humility, despite the fact that our models might be in line with other people and what we believe to be the physical world itself. There's this fundamental aspect of it that is still of our models, that is still subjective, tentative, not absolute, not reflecting something absolute, etc. This is the first topic that I want to discuss right now. Now, the part after that would be then considering how our experience is nevertheless informative. So this is keeping us grounded to the idea that our experience is still controlled in some sense. So if we were to make an analogy with Anil Seth's controlled hallucination metaphor, this would be honoring the controlled aspect of this. We can recognize that the meaning that manifests in experience would reflect something meaningful or useful, potentially. And that's something that we can then leverage. And then the last part of this would be, how do we navigate truth given both the humility and the information here? Which could be something like epistemic practices such as articulating reasons, qualifying claims, checking evidence, distinguishing confidence from accuracy, all that stuff. So first, we just want to talk about the epistemic humility here. And in a video on that type of topic, I would want to honor as many perspectives on that type of concept. So that would include looking at how this has arisen in our culture and our wisdom over time, and then perhaps anything else that you think that should be included in that discussion of epistemic humility. So I'm basically coaxing it to tell me about emptiness and like other spiritual ideas of nothingness and whatnot. So we'll see if that's where it brings us. But this is where we would be able to do it in the document. I want to know, like, what would we want to talk about in this type of epistemic humility topic? The fact that our experience of knowledge is not necessarily a reflection of that knowledge being some absolute truism about the world. We are operating within our own subjective experience. All right, what's happened since here? What is going on here? Is that how that channel's spelled? I know it's pronounced Kotzkazat, but I don't know how it's spelled because it's nowhere near how it sounds. Hold on a minute now. Does that have to be a whole minute? Is that a new K-pop group? G-pop. If we use some kind of logic to speak about different worlds which can be spoken about, and some logic we use, it's not surprising that our logic is invariant. German pop. Wow. Why do you think that this is okay? Very nice. All right, what do you have for me, ChatGPT? Your segment should argue that epistemic humility is the ethical, yo, we gotta chill out here, and practical posture that follows from model-mediated experience. Now, we can't know anything, we can't know anything, but our knowing is mediated, partial, revisable, and socially accountable. The cleanest thesis might be, because experience is constructed through a living, affective, history-shaped model, we should not treat experience as self-certifying, but because the model is constrained by the world, the body, and other minds, we also should not collapse into relativism or skepticism. So, okay, this is what it means by ethical. It's what we ought to do. We ought not do this because of what the science tells us. Epistemic humility is the discipline of holding claims with the right kind of confidence. We have to be careful about that one as well. That lets you avoid two bad conclusions. Naive realism, I see it this way, therefore that is how it is. Or epistemic nihilism, everything is subjective, therefore nothing can be known. The middle position is something like fallibilist realism. We can have knowledge, but not absolute unmediated possession of truth. Fallibilism is the view that beliefs are never supported in a fully conclusive way, yet fallibilists generally need not become skeptics about knowledge itself. So look at that. That beliefs are never supported in a fully conclusive way. So what does that say towards that thing that I keep dropping? I don't know where you.
Memories.
I think it was too long ago. The principle of PSR, PRS, PSR, PRS. Oh man, I've lost it. I don't remember what it was. Of sufficient. Principle of sufficient rationale. I don't know if that was it. Okay. I'm skeptical of that. Very nice. So basically it is non-confirming. We've got a video. Is this a clean video? Did they pronounce it? Oh, here we go.
Can you
did I get it wrong?
trust Kurzgesagt?
Kotzkazat. Oh, it is going a little. There's a little R there, so even I was doing it too. Kotzkazat. It's like Kotzkazat.
Videos?
That's as best as I could do. Are still using Branham's theory of meaning, or now you're a Kripke fan? We got another Brandon fan here. That is a broad statement that it cannot defend. Okay. I'm not familiar with Kripke. I agree with Pruss about modality, but when it comes to natural concepts like chairs, I'm sympathetic to Brandam's inferentialism. The nice thing about inferentialism is it picks up on this what I would describe as like a scientifically grounded view of subjective experience. So, you know, when I look at something and I perceive it to be a certain way, we could say that that's what I'm inferring, given that my brain is a predictive well, it is a predictive model, but it's a predictive mechanism here, at least in regard to my conscious experience. Gyat's Gazat. Funders don't matter as long as the logic is sound. You're crazy that you're familiar with Brandon but not Kripke. I just assume no one's familiar with Brandon, honestly. I guess it's because of self-studying. Oh! I've heard about him, but not the philosophy. Okay, my problem is that the assumption that what you're inferring is wrong, which is not scientific, you should confirm whether it's correct or not. My problem is that the assumption that what you're inferring is wrong, which is not scientific. I think something's got to budge in that sentence. I don't know, because it could mean a couple different things given. Is there a comma after wrong? So my problem is that the assumption that what you're inferring is wrong, and it's not scientific. That's what I'm guessing you're saying. You should confirm whether it's correct or not. Oh, no. Okay, no, that's not what you're saying. My problem is that the assumption that what you're inferring is wrong is not necessarily scientific in spirit. Like you infer like what you're, like there's something more hypothesis-like in inference. You're hypothesizing. This is active inference, by the way. It's almost as if what you perceive to be the world, or what your brain at least thinks is what's going on, is a hypothesis, and your brain then acts to make that hypothesis more obvious or more real in some sense. So you're acting so that your observations are in line with your hypothesis. So you act according to it. You kind of commit to that as a way of the world. Do you not believe that the scientific method's norms can be questioned? I think they can be questioned. Check out the perception video. I literally say that. If they can be questioned, why do you seem to defer to them as if they're the only reliable path to truth? Because they are the most reliable path to truth. And truth in the specific regard that I'm mentioning within the essay, or within the document for that matter, right? There's all kinds of issues with relying on what authority tells you, or what you believe is right, or all these other things. So you need some mechanism to actually determine whether or not it is more or less right, and that you don't get from anecdotes or mere intuitions. You need some developed set of norms that actually you can then be responsible to in your own understanding. Okay, what I'm saying is that the assumption that when someone infers something is wrong is not very... Okay, I still don't know how to parse the sentence. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What I'm saying is the assumption that when someone infers something is wrong, it's not very like. There's multiple places I think we could put a comma and it's going to make the sentence mean two different things. That's why I'm struggling here. He has an assumption that's incorrect. So like when our brain assumes something about the world, we could describe that as both being fundamentally right in some sense, because that's what your body and brain is going to operate off of. Like that's the truth that your body and brain is operating with. So it's right in that sense. But then it's also fundamentally wrong in some like more theoretical truth sense. You're always wrong. Your body and brain is always wrong, because it's always going to then get hit with sensory stimuli that tells it where it's actually slightly off. So it's always not perfectly right. So in both of those ways, in both of those very fundamental ways, you could say that we are constantly right and wrong at the same time. Now, that isn't to say anything about when we start actually consciously understanding ourselves as right and wrong. Then we have to start operating within the norms, the cultural norms that we find intelligible. Like, you know, how do you actually prove that something is right or wrong and whatnot? Yeah, it is tricky when we start getting into sciences that are so unintuitive. Like they don't seem to match our perception of reality. But once again, I would refer you to the perception video. We talk about how just because things seem a certain way doesn't mean that that's how things actually are. As Wittgenstein pointed out with the Earth and the Sun, it seemed quite intuitively that the sun, or that the sun went around the Earth, right? That's how it seemed. That's how it looked. And then you learn a little more and you find out that it's not that way, and someone yeah, and then the question is, you know, what else might similarly be slightly more complicated than what we think, what we find intuitive, but it would still result in the same experience. So I also think Brandom is a lot harder than Kripke, but I guess your claim makes perfect sense. Self-study does not care about what came first or what is easier or more difficult. Right. Peregrine. Nice. What is counterintuitive about quantum mechanics then, if you're a physicist? Well, it depends which version of quantum mechanics that you look into. I think one of the main patterns that we've found with all of our discussions of quantum mechanics on this channel is that different theories carry with them different intuitive problems, or like unintuitive tenets, basically. So, you know, if you just follow the what's the main one? What's the one where you're collapsing the wave function? If you're collapsing the wave function, then you get spooky action at a distance. That's very unintuitive. We have no idea how to make sense of that. Okay, so then let's fix spooky action at a distance. Let's take on either relative quantum mechanics, or let's take on many worlds. And in the case of many worlds, it's like, okay, you fix spooky action at a distance, but now you have many worlds. Like, that's not intuitive at all. And then relative quantum mechanics is so unfathomable in like what that even means. That I like, you know, you've lost intuition again, right? Because our intuitive experience is one in which there is just a shared world that we're operating in, and relative or relational quantum mechanics. That's what it is. Relational quantum mechanics would throw a wrench in that type of idea, that ontologically that there would be, you know, in some sense, many different ways you could look at the world, and not from the perspective of a human being, but from the perspective of any matter. So any matter that could be entangled. All right. Why is that a good standard for truth? Because once again, our only what's the word here? Our only view of truth, our only view of meaning, the only way we interface with meaning and truth is through conscious experience. And if we are to, you know, believe that there is a physical world that we can look at, then what matters is empirical observation. So, if outcomes are things you observe, so predicting outcomes would be akin to seeing what's true in some sense. Okay, we could also connect that to predictive processing. Once again, our brain is predicting the way the world is. So it's kind of predicting the outcome in some sense. It's predicting what the world will be, 2 seconds into the future right now, right? Like my brain is predicting that this is a pen. Like I'm operating off of this being a pen. I'm operating off of the assumption that if I move my hand over and I pick this thing up, it's going to feel a certain way and it's going to do a certain thing when I move it in my hands and I write with it, right? So I'm making predictions about outcomes. My brain is doing that inherently. And that's, as we talked about in the perception video, my body and brain is acting according to those predictions, in the sense that when my prediction is not being met by sensory stimuli, whether that is proprioceptive, so my sensing of my body movement and where my body is, or visual sensory data, then my body is going to act to fix that error, that mismatch. And that's through the predictive processing lens, that's what makes sense of us doing anything in our everyday life. And this, as we've discussed, this view of predictive processing helps us make sense of a lot of different things, such as emotion and affect, and obviously dreams, as we discuss, and all kinds of weird sensory things, that the video of the Coke can, how we could see red even though there's no red there. There's so many different things that make sense of predictive processing and vice versa. All right, so once again, I think when you're saying, is that a good standard for truth, I think you think that truth is this like fundamental thing about the world. So yeah, we only interface with truth through our conscious experience, through empirical observation, whether that is, just literally our just conscious experience. And so, yeah, it is a good standard for determining whether or not our feeling of certainty is actually appropriate. So it's not actually going to, this is the crazy thing. It's not going to affect what we end up, what is true in some fundamental sense, but it can affect what we end up feeling certain about. So it's kind of like the scientific method is something that you have to internalize, such that you then perceive the world in a certain way, such that if you were not to follow the rules of it, your brain would tell you that you aren't able to experience the world in that type of certainty because you have not tested it, right? You can now be less certain of things that you haven't found evidence for, right? So, remember, people like thousands of years ago, they just they believed certain things were the way they were. They thought that when it rained, it was because some deity was punishing them or whatever. And now, if we were to think that, well, we literally couldn't think that. I mean, people might think that, but if you've internalized any norms of the science here, you would at least be able to understand that it would be hard to at least prove that to be true. And so like the ideas, the implicit norms of falsifiability here are kind of inherent in our beliefs. All right. Okay. And they're very hard to understand. Like, what exactly is counterintuitive when we apply them to experiment? Oh, so yeah, once we start applying them to experiments, then they help us out a ton. Like, I think that many worlds is quite elegant. It actually does solve all of our problems. The only pill we have to swallow is the idea that there's many worlds. So that's nice. Why people think that truth even exists, like fallibilism can be false, and there's no possibility of creating some scientific theory which is isomorphic to world. I think the reason why people believe truth exists is because our brain kind of has to operate off of some assumption, right? Like we operate off of an assumption of truth. Like there's an implicit assumption of truth involved in our activity. Like in order to do something, in order for our body to do something, it has to believe something is true. It has to believe in truth fundamentally, which is kind of crazy. So when I start saying that there's like no such thing as a fundamental truth, um, I'm really just proposing some social linguistic tool that if we were to internalize it, it would affect how we end up perceiving the world. But it's not going to take away that implicit truth that I'm connecting to our biological mechanisms. So, and when I say biological mechanisms, that's including our conscious experience. Like we consciously feel as though things are true. We have to. Saying quantum mechanics is not counterintuitive ignores the actual data in the double slit experiment. A single electron acts like a wave going through two places at once. If you look at it, it snaps back to a simple particle. So yeah, once again, I think what you're mentioning here is only through the one theory of quantum mechanics. And if only there, we were to look through it using a different theory, then what you're explaining to be counterintuitive would actually not be counterintuitive. But you have to swallow a different pill. I would shout out Sean Carroll's book, Something Deeply Hidden. I think that even talks about what the double split experiment would be like with the many worlds setup. Many worlds is cringe. I guess energy using term truth here as end of inquiry or something like that. As end of inquiry. Oh, okay. Right. And I would assert that there is no end of inquiry. If you want to argue mechanics, which is in great debate even to this day by physicists, maybe do it in a format that is more few characters. Yes. And if you use decoherence, you can explain why interference patterns and double slit is okay. Many worlds is cringe. Right. I mean, you could also go, once again, as I mentioned, you could go with relational quantum mechanics, and then I don't know if there was any other ones that made spooky action at distance go away. Let's figure this one out. Okay, I understand that certain theories about quantum mechanics carry different pills to swallow. For example, the idea that observation collapses the wave function carries with it this tough pill of, first of all, collapsing wave functions, but also spooky action at a distance, if not any others. Then there are theories that make spooky action at a distance actually not be a problem, such as many worlds and relational quantum mechanics. I'm curious, what are other quantum theories that make the spooky action at a distance problem go away? Okay, I thought that was relatively well said there. All right, actually, yes, I can explain it. I have a paper on it. Oh my gosh, it's incredible. So QM formalism, very good in explaining experiments. What problem with QM then? Cubism is based. Cubism might show up here. Very instrumental, very based. I'll separate no faster than light signaling from the stronger no superluminal physical influence because a lot of interpretations solve only the first while Bell's theorem constrains the second. Okay. Man, this thing is doing a research paper over here. All right, continuing with epistemic humility. Define humility as calibration. Whoa, I don't want to define humility. I would explicitly distinguish epistemic humility from weakness, vagueness, or both sides neutrality. A good definition for the video. So I don't want to ever say epistemic humility is. I would say something like, we're referring to the practiced awareness that our beliefs may be incomplete. And I would not even want to say that. I would just say that we can consider that our beliefs may be incomplete, distorted, overconfident, misframed, or wrong, even when they feel obvious from the inside. Contemporary philosophy treats intellectual humility as concerning how we relate to our own beliefs, views, and judgments. Psychology similarly frames it around recognizing the limits of one's knowledge and the possibility that one's beliefs may be mistaken. Then make this practical. Humility is not believe less, it is believe more proportionally. What kind of claim am I making and what level of confidence does it deserve? So we can talk about that, obviously. That opens a very useful distinction. It seems like she is angry from she is angry with me, which is a hypothesis, which people always reject me. This social dynamic causes X. That's like a world claim, moral claim. This is wrong. I don't know if we want to go in that whole direction, but historical and cultural perspectives to include. This is where I'm hoping that we get Buddhist inquiry. Okay. You do not need to make this a world history survey, but you can show that epistemic humility is not a modern invention. It recurs wherever people notice the gap between reality and human grasp. So, Socratic humility. Socrates is the obvious Western anchor in Plato's Apology. Socrates contrasts himself with people who know nothing but think they know. His advantage is that he neither knows nor thinks that he knows. This gives you humility as inquiry through examination. I don't know how to pronounce this. Skepticism. Pyrrhonian. It's as easy as it gets. Pyrrhonian skepticism centered the practice of suspending judgment when arguments remained unresolved. This is useful as a foil. It shows the power of withholding premature certainty, but it also raises the danger of cognitive paralysis if humility becomes total suspension. Then we've got Confucian humility, which gives a practical formulation. Take what you know as what you know, and what you do not know as what you do not know. This is humility as disciplined social speech. Do not overstate your grasp. Right, and that's what I've felt at this stream. And then we got Buddhist inquiry. The Kalama Sutta is useful because it does not simply say trust yourself. It warns against relying merely on tradition, scripture, inference, charisma, or teacherly authority, and then asks whether things lead to harm or welfare. This gives you humility as experiential, ethical, and pragmatic testing. Then we got Jain many-sidedness, the epistemologies Anekanta. Says reality is multifaceted and no single view captures it completely. The Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy explicitly connects this to fallibilism and perspectival claims. This is extremely relevant to your model-mediated frame. Perspectives are not worthless. They are partial. Then we got in apophatic or negative theology, humility emerges from the claim that ultimate reality exceeds human concepts and language, which argues that God exceeds positive conceptual description, right? Which we could also like theorize in line with what we've discussed, but it the problem here is it still assumes that there is some truth that would be able to be grasped, perhaps not with language. This gives you humility before conceptual limitation. So this might still make you think that some religious experience is giving you access to the truth, which at the end of the day, it's just your biology and your brain activity that is affecting an experience that feels profound. So scientific humility. Science institutionalizes humility through methods, public evidence, replication, peer criticism, uncertainty reporting, and revision. Describe reproducibility and replicability as ways the scientific community scrutinizes claims and gains confidence over time, while also emphasizing that scientific claims do not deliver absolute certainty. Pierce is also useful here. His fallibilism treats inquiry as provisional but not hopeless, with the maxim, do not block the way of inquiry. All right, we got, oh my gosh, there's so many of these. Situated in social epistemology. This is important because humility is not only about I might be wrong, it is also about where I am looking from and whom I am failing to hear. So Haraway's situated knowledges argues against a pretend view from nowhere and frames objectivity as accountable, embodied, partial seeing. So this is kind of another theoretical view that we have to be careful about, this partial seeing. Like if we were only to aggregate everyone's seeing, we would get the full seeing. I mean, that's one way you can think about truth, right? We can think about truth even connected to subjective experience as perhaps some amalgamation of all of subjective experience. But that also falls prey to what if everyone is not following the norms and everyone's actually just following their faith, right? And so then you might be able to easily leverage these norms to determine that the whole faith is wrong in some prediction about the world, and you would never know because you just got an amalgamation of people's experiences, which is not robust. Fricker's epistemic injustice adds that people can be wronged specifically as knowers when prejudice causes their testimony to receive too little credibility. All right, so this might be in a different category here. Indigenous and plural knowledge systems, you could briefly mention two-eyed seeing as a modern example of epistemic humility in practice. Learning with one eye from indigenous knowledge and with the other from non-indigenous Western knowledge without reducing one to the other. Okay, so this is just some sort of pluralism about how you go about your epistemic inquiries. All right. Oh my gosh, I'm missing physics beef? All right. I gotta check out this physics beef. Whispers are off? All right, there's nothing toxic happening here, right? We've got your whispers are I'm tired of lying that instrumentalism is not the only correct philosophy of science. Yeah, so we touched up on instrumentalism. I forget what we ended up coming. It was actually instrumentalism was in the label that it ended up giving us, but it was some sort of neo-pragmatic instrumental social something that still had a naturalistic aspect, so it's still grounded in the neuropragmatism side. So I am open to the instrumental idea. But once again, when we say instrumental, it can't be what we think we want. It's what our body and brain just happen to do, what it happens to want for the sake of whatever our DNA has set in motion. Right? This is a story about regulation, which is really just a story about evolution. It doesn't measure problem. People who deny that collapse. Okay, if you say so. Oh. Whoa. Chill with the... None of these statements are dumb. Okay. Yo, Daniel N. Stan Hattonite, the Manhattanite. Very cool. With a NBA 1 team under my belt. Okay. Let's calm down on the physics stuff, except I'm about to throw stuff in the fire, whatever that saying is. Okay, the crucial caveat is Bell's style spooky action cannot simply be removed for free. Bell's theorem says that a broad class of locally causal theories cannot reproduce all quantum predictions, and Bell test experiments have strongly favored the quantum predictions. So every interpretation that removes spooky action does so by giving up some other classical sounding assumption. So, here are the main options beside many worlds. What about many worlds? I would like to see the many worlds one. So cubism, quantum Bayesianism. How it makes spooky action go away. The wave function is not an objective physical thing spread across space. It represents an agent's betting, commitments, or expectations. So collapse is just belief updating, not a physical event that zaps a distant particle. The tough pill is the quantum state does not describe observer-independent reality. This is very hard to swallow if you want physics to describe the world as it is. Then we got pragmatist information theoretic views, similar to cubism but less subjective. Quantum states are tools for giving objectively good advice about what to expect, not literal physical states. So distant collapse is not a real physical process. And then the tough pill there is that it becomes less like a picture of reality and more like a rule book for rational prediction, which is actually kind of, obviously that's in line with the philosophy that we talk about. And quite nice given the fact that when we start trying to, measure the world, the physical world, we are doing it through human empirical methods, right? We look at the split experiment. We observe what's happening. Okay. Consistent histories, decoherent histories. There is no fundamental measurement collapse. You assign probabilities only within a consistent framework of possible histories. The spooky action story is treated as a mistake caused by mixing incompatible classical style descriptions. So describes this approach as making quantum mechanics local and compatible with special relativity. But if you do this, you give up the idea that there is always one single all-purpose globally true description of what happened. Histories are framework dependent. So that's almost a little similar in the subjective pragmatic side. So far all of these have been getting out of it through some sort of subjectivism, it seems. Okay, model interpretations, another one. No physical collapse. Systems have some definite properties, but not all the properties classical realism would like them to have. These interpretations were explicitly developed as no collapse approaches aimed partly at reconciling QM with relativity. You need a special rule saying which properties are actually definite. That's the problem here. Some versions have had serious difficulties with relativity and measurement. We got retrocausal time symmetric interpretations. The correlations are not explained by an instantaneous sideways influence from Alice to Bob. Instead, later measurement settings can help constrain earlier hidden variables, where the whole experiment is treated as a space-time global pattern. So you accept backward in time causation, future boundary conditions, or a block universe or all-at-once explanation. Oh my gosh. All right. Can you give me the many worlds and RQM table as well? I would like to see those. Okay, the ones I would put highest on your list are cubism, consistent histories, retrocausal time symmetric interpretations, modal interpretations, and superdeterminism. A useful way to classify them is by what they sacrifice. Many worlds give up single outcome. Cubism, give up objective wave function. Relational QM, give up observer independent state / facts. Then we got consistent, and once again, observer isn't like a human here. Observer is any entangleable, I guess, electron. Consistent histories give up one universal Boolean story of reality. Retrocausal theories give up one way past to future causal explanation, which is kind of crazy. That's unintuitive. Superdeterminism gives up measurement independence. We got Bohmian mechanics does not make spooky action go away. It makes non-locality explicit. And then objective collapse theories also do not usually remove the problem. They make collapse physically real, which tends to sharpen the relativity non-locality issue, though relativistic versions have been pursued. My own map would be, if your main dislike is physical collapse, I just connected those. Physical collapse. If you don't like physical collapse, then look at cubism. Consistent histories, modal interpretations, or many worlds. If your main dislike is superluminal influence, look at consistent histories, cubism, retrocausal approaches, or superdeterminism. If your main dislike is giving up objective reality, then the options narrow sharply, and you are pushed toward Bohmian mechanics, modal interpretations, retrocausality, or superdeterminism, each with a serious price. Okay, so adding many worlds and RQM to the same what pill do you swallow. So Many Worlds gets out of it is there's no physical collapse. The universal wave function always evolves locally and smoothly according to the Schrodinger equation. In an EPR Bell experiment, the distant particle is not instantaneously changed by your measurement. Rather, the measuring device, observer, and particles become entangled. The apparent collapse is just you finding yourself in one branch. But the tough pill is you give up single outcome reality. Every possible measurement outcome occurs in some branch. The hard questions are, what exactly counts as a branch, why probabilities follow the Born rule, and what it means to say I was likely to see outcome A if all outcomes occur. All right, and then RQM states there are no, relational quantum mechanics, RQM. Quantum states are not absolute observer-independent properties of systems. A state is always relative to another physical system. So when Alice measures her particle, the state changes relative to Alice, but that does not mean Bob's distant particle undergoes an absolute physical collapse. There's no God's eye wave function collapse propagating across space. And once again, it would be a little inappropriate to say that Alice or Bob are the observers in this view. You give up observer-independent facts, at least at the quantum level. So the really unintuitive thing is that every electron counts as an observer. That would then affect some sort of, state here. Now, when you think about our conscious experience, we have to just consider what type of system we're entangled with. And that's very odd to think about. So there's something very unintuitive about this one as well. Okay. How did that do? How was that? How do we feel about that? Did I just trigger everyone? Oh, Copenhagen. That's the that was the word. Right. Some physicists are just still want to believe that science is giving us some truth about independent reality. Right, and so many of these theories are quite elegant, but would throw salt in that idea. Superdeterminism wins the day again. I think the problem with superdeterminism that we explored is that there's what would it mean for there to be like gaps in between entangled systems, such that you wouldn't be able to have some sort of superdeterminism. Like imagine that there's systems of entanglement. Let's just say an easy one would be like, imagine the type of entanglement that's happening in some galaxy that isn't actually visible within our system, and we can see, and even that's, I think there were actually gaps between like where I'm at right now and someone on the other side of the earth. There's actually like meaningful gaps between entanglement. Like I'm not like entangled with that person, even though there are local entanglements that you could say are connecting us. And yeah. So I forget that whole discussion, but there was a reason why we came away with the idea that superdeterminism might be a little too much of a gamble. Okay. Wait, AI is the expert here. Anyways, done talking. Yo, we gotta chill out with the immediate ad hominems here. RQM is kind of cute though. RQM is kind of cute. I do like it. There's something nice about it. All right. By the way, I talked to a real PhD in theoretical physics a couple days ago, so he wasn't shy about just asking questions in Gemini Google search. But I guess because he's not very interested in the topic of QM interpretations. If he's gone, I'll say I personally don't think that he has a PhD based on knowing him along the cheese. Even if he has, okay, right? That's a good way of thinking about it. I only am interested in arguments, or in the ways in which we conduct ourselves in arguments. As Jordan Peterson says, it's not about the game, it's about the game of games. And he probably does one of these moves while he says that. Yeah, ad hominem's not great. Kind of ruins the fun for everyone. Okay. Yeah, I'm pretty there are certainly ways in which I'm not a fan of AI as like a thing, as a technology at large, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that it creates is going to be slop of some sort. And I think that's what people are conflating a lot of the time. So even for things that are visual, it is still probably slop a ton of the time right now. It's not always going to be slop. It's going to get to a point where it's not slop. And so we have to be ready for that we could still be against it, even if it's not slop. We don't want to be on Spotify Discover and to have some AI music show up that we end up liking. Maybe we just don't want that, right? And that's fine. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you'd always notice it being slop. So, and on the side of this, right? Now, granted, it's actually much nicer now that it shows us its sources. That's a lot more reassuring. And we still have to check those sources sometimes. Sometimes it could find a source and then like misinterpret it or use the source in a way that's not appropriate. So we have to always keep our eyes out for that. But in terms of like the information that it gives when you give like a Google search about something that is very much accessible information on the internet or in textbooks, which have been read and consumed by these models, like I'd expect it to give an answer that some expert would agree with in certain cases. Now, of course, there are instances where we have to be careful, where it can certainly use language that it doesn't realize is inappropriate. That's another thing. Because, a lot of times experts write, but they don't write about the intricacies of how you ought to talk about certain things, even though that is kind of inherent in what they write. Okay. Are you talking about the cosmic bell tests? I don't think that's threatening to superdeterminism if all entanglements were correlated from the beginning. Oh, I don't know what I was talking about. I don't recall. Maybe it was that test, but maybe it wasn't. Right, like in theory it would be it would be correlated from the beginning. I don't remember why there was an issue though. I just remember that there was an issue. Maybe we'll get to that. Honestly, I might get to that in terms of I think that was since January, and I'm only editing. I just edited videos from the January 14th stream. So if I find that video, I'll get it, and then I'll let you know that we found it, and we can we could go through that discussion. Okay, if you're not a scientific realist, are you a classic instrumentalist or a Van Frasian style constructive empiricist? You help me answer this question. Oh, I shouldn't have done hi. We gotta restart here. It's gonna take way too long. Looking for a chill response. I just don't know the meanings of these options. Oh no. Okay. I don't want it to give me. I don't want it to answer for me. Don't answer for me. I just need to understand what I might be signing up for. Okay. I heard about Van Freysen, but I'm not going to say I'm constructive empiricist because I didn't read him. Maybe the ideas are like. Okay, okay. You're being asked where do you stand. No, you're being asked where you stand if you reject scientific realism. Scientific realism roughly says mature scientific theories are at least approximately true, including in what they say about unobservable things like electrons, fields, genes, quarks, space-time curvature, and so on. What does approximately true mean here? If we're talking true in like the fundamental nature of ontology, then I would say no. But if we're talking about the physical world and we're being a little more pragmatic about the discussion, then I would say sure. All right, classic instrumentalism. Classic instrumentalism treats scientific theories mainly as tools for prediction and control. Beautiful. In this view, a theory does not need to be true or even approximately true to be successful. It just needs to work. For example, talk about electrons is useful because it helps us predict experimental results, build technology, and organize observations. But we should not take the theory as literally telling us what reality is like behind the observable phenomena. That one's a little tricky because we can obviously have this theoretical understanding behind the observable phenomena that would then imply observable phenomena. So that's what I would like, but okay. But I do like signing up for the idea that science is not really in the business of describing the hidden structure of the world. It's more like a highly successful predictive apparatus. I like that. The downside is that this can sound too deflationary, right? Scientists often seem to be doing more than just making predictions. Are they? Are they? Explanations are in some sense making predictions. Intervene, discover mechanisms, and distinguish better from worse accounts of unobservable reality. Then the Van Freysen style constructive empiricism. It's more subtle. It says the aim of science is not literal truth about everything. So now this is a little tricky because the aim of science is carrying in some intentionality that I don't know if all scientists would be there for. Right? I think a lot of scientists are actually doing science with the idea that they're figuring out the literal truth about everything. So it says that the aim of science is not literal truth about everything, observable and unobservable. Instead, the aim is empirical adequacy. So a theory is empirically adequate if what it says about observable phenomena is true. So the constructive empiricist can say, I accept the theory because it correctly accounts for what we can observe, but I do not have to believe its claims about unobservable entities are true. So yeah, I wouldn't go in this direction because it's now starting to talk about, you know, our access to observable stuff versus unobservable stuff. I actually like the number one a little more here. I'd actually go classic instrumentalism because it says, regardless of what we're talking about, whether it's observable or unobservable, we're recognizing the pragmatic thing that's going on when we're saying things and we are writing things down in textbooks and when we're teaching kids things and when we're going and making a hypothesis and then testing it in a lab. Like it's more clear about what's actually happening physically. Okay. That's how I'd answer that. All right. Nice one. Thanks. I am contrary. Very like this approach. +1 BTW. Okay. We're at the end here. We can switch back to our humility discussion. The conceptual spine of the segment. I would structure the video around 5 claims. First, my experience is real as experience, but not automatically accurate as interpretation. I have to figure out how to effectively introduce all the stuff we've discussed in the perception video, at least the implications, without having to go into that deeply. And the worst part is whenever you do a video like this, where you have to like preface something or give a prelude, is it takes away from your valuable first few seconds where they might click away. So I can't do it right away. I think that was the mistake I made in the previous consciousness video, where I said very upfront that this was like a sequel almost, that this is a follow-up, where I don't want to say that anymore. I want to give a nice hook, and then I want to say, hey, we know this from this video, you could check it out here, and then blah, 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 we just continue. Not spend too much time on it. All right, second, confidence is a feeling, not proof, so that's another implication we got out of the perception video. A belief can feel obvious because it is true. Whoa, I'm not going to say that. But also because it's familiar, affectively charged, identity protective, socially reinforced, or narratively convenient. So I wouldn't say this first part. I would just say that a belief can feel obvious or true. It could feel true because of all these things, which is what we talk about in the other video. So humility does not erase truth. So this is, it's not grasping the, I guess, so if I were to tell it something, I would say, let's not use truth as a topic that might imply that it is some true thing here. Let's only use it in the sense that of the feeling true, and then the theoretical, what would be able to be more, I don't know, more conceptually justifiably true in our own experience, which would be something like, oh, I know I have the evidence for this. I know I have reasons for why this thing is true. Therefore, my feeling of truth right now, which I would get if I didn't even realize that I could think things are true without evidence, that feeling of truth would actually feel justifiable. Like I've earned this feeling of truth. And if I didn't have the evidence, I wouldn't experience that feeling of truth. So that's like a nuance we would want to add. Which maybe I should just talk about. I should have said that all into dictate. Okay, first, one thing that we seriously have to pay attention to and look out for is our use of the word truth. Even though I mentioned that we could theorize some sort of truth that is shared amongst our social groups, or some sort of truth that connects to something like what we end up being able to predict as empirical, or what we can empirically predict. We wouldn't want to use truth in such an unambiguous way such that people who are watching would be able to think that we are actually making a case about some fundamental absolute truth. So for the sake of this video, I would only want to use truth as either the feeling of truth, or being really explicit about truth as a theoretical concept that is not actually grounded to some ontological truth. But of course, we have to be very careful with that. So for now, let's not even entertain that, and I'll figure out if we should entertain that later. Okay, that was the first thing. The second thing I wanted to add, second, regarding the historical and cultural perspectives, to include what you mentioned was more of the practical side of this, or the pragmatic side of this. I was wondering whether or not we could, not wondering whether or not we could, I was hoping that we could consider the different concepts or framings that might take this idea in what would it be? Concepts or framings that show up are quite similar to this idea that show up. So something like emptiness would be a good example, where it's more of a ontological conclusion or an insight about the nature of whatever, consciousness or reality. So I'm looking for other aspects of history and culture and religion that have made similar insights. Even they might even be assertive or dogmatic, but I'm just wondering what else might be in that list that we would want to at least look into and perhaps include in this full survey. And when I say survey, I just mean as examples that might be interesting to pepper in when I'm describing what I'm really trying to get at with this video. Whew. Okay, now we got to keep going. We got to read through this just in case I have other notes that I want to touch upon. So, okay, humility does not erase truth. Okay. Truth-seeking possible by loosening the grip of premature certainty. Other people are not just obstacles to my certainty. They're part of how my models get correct. So yeah, we could always talk about the types of ways in which we can navigate truth. The point is not to live in doubt, right? Pitfalls worth naming. Landing point. Okay. Ideally, we would make the video on this entire section where it ends up with a navigating truth thing, because that's another thing that I wanted to look into. Like, what are actual techniques or tools that we could leverage for an individual? Though I think if we were to go into detail on those, that would be part 2 material, but we should at least mention it, perhaps. I'm not sure. We'll have to consider if that's too in the weeds. It depends how long this script would be without it, because I don't want to do a really long script right now. I think we need a little break from a really long script. Okay, I agree with both corrections for this video. I would avoid using truth as a freestanding term. I would use more careful language. This produces a feeling of obviousness. Our models can converge around stable patterns. Experience gives us structured contact with what constrains us. That's really weird. This is reliable under certain forms of checking. I guess this is a little more empirical. Right, it's going to matter what ends up being the mechanism for making something that you believe to be true as testable or empirical. So really, yeah, it's just, you know, the feeling of certainty is not the same thing as unmediated access. That's going to be it. So I'm going to have to read through this, consider what types of framings I would think are being, ChatGPT being deflationist about truth. It only does that if I tell it to, you know? I have to figure out what would actually be the things I want to say in this section. This is such an important section, and it can also be quite a practical section. So this is what I would want to do. So yeah, we can get to these topics. In Maya, non-duality, Taoism, the way. Okay. So yeah, maybe the story would actually be one of the things that might be effective to do is to walk through some of these, but also then to point out how we have to be. Oh, also, Hitch Streezy, how's it going? Long time no see. We have to point out the nuances or the stipulations that we have to mention with some of these. So some of these act as if there is some like I don't know, what was I going to say in that regard? Yeah, I guess. Oh, yeah. Some of these act as if there is the truth that we just can't have access to. Like they're still stuck in the Kantian gap, right? The gap between the noumenal and the phenomenal, and that was something that we explicitly said is not. We're not allowed to hold that type of idea anymore. So, or at least that's not what we discussed implies. Okay. Then how would one falsify a theory? Because falsification presupposes that a theory can be wrong, which means it's truth apt. Right, like within the system that we've set up, we can understand what it would mean for a system to be true, and we could also mean what it would mean for a system to be false. And inherently also we could say that we understand what it would mean for us to be able to make it clear that it was true. We could evidence it and evidence it that it's false. So falsification would not necessarily no, I should say falsification kind of carries this idea that there needs to be a clear, explicit way in which you can make it obvious that it was false or true. So it's playing in the framework that we've set up for ourselves. Like, it's still a normative social framework that we've now set up. It doesn't mean that in the fabric of the universe it is fundamentally true or false. Like, it's not like we've presupposed it being fundamentally true here. It's like within the system, it presupposes that it's true within that system. Okay. Like, if we scientific realists, we have to believe that our scientific theories better and better approximate reality, which is and independent of us. I just don't believe in this. I don't believe we ought to believe. I think I'm there. Okay. The physical world constrains experience. Dun dun dun. Good. Going good. How are you? I'm doing great. Also, do you follow the World Cup? Unfortunately, I don't follow the World Cup, but I probably will once it starts getting close to the end. I don't follow the sport outside of the World Cup, but I usually like just watching the best of the best do stuff. So, yeah, I think it would be fun to watch. Just gonna say this is my intuitions now. How epistemically humble of you. I love that, actually. Like, I think that there's times where we understand that we have in the past looked into something or done a lot of thinking about something, a lot of reasoning, and we understand that we had gotten to our point of view from a ton of work, but we don't remember why. We don't remember what led us there. We don't remember like what was actually the reasoning behind it, but we know that we put in that work. So we kind of have to be firm with our own trust in ourselves in that regard. Now, that's just for the time being. Maybe we end up coming into contact with a sufficient argument such that regardless of whatever I used to think, this argument that you're giving right now is so sufficient that I am going to let go of this argument that I might be missing. But that would take a lot, right? It would have to be something so conclusive. So, but yeah, in those situations, it's better to just say like, hey, I actually just don't know the reasoning behind this, but you know, that's what I remember believing with certainty when actually going through the logic. I just don't know what you mean by in the fabric of the universe. There is the realm of conscious experience and there is the physical universe. The world of conscious experience is constrained by the physical universe, which is why it is possible for an idea in the context of conscious experience to correspond to the physical universe through indirect inference to a phenomenon. Right. None of this says that there has to be meaning in the universe, though. Right? When we think about the physical universe, we're still adding the meaning in our own experience. The meaning isn't in the universe, it's in the experience. So that's where we wouldn't say that there's actually something true in the physical universe, but we understand the physical universe to be a certain way such that it behaves like it's not going to change, right? Like, we still believe that the physical universe is going to be static in some sense, that there are true things about the physical universe. But when we talk about true things about the physical universe, we are talking in the language of human experience and understanding. We're not talking about that stuff in the language of the physical universe. So the things that we understand to be true about the physical universe has always been in connection with our empirical power, what we're able to actually observe. So we didn't know things until we had a microscope or a telescope, and then we learned new things. That isn't to say that we discovered what was, there in some sense. In some sense, that is what's happening, but in another sense, it's just we're now able to formalize more information based off of more observations that we didn't have access to, or that we just never had. And what equation does fabric of the universe come in? It's the issue is the way in which you might speak about the physical world having meaning in it, right? Like there being things that are true in the physical universe, where all the meaning that we could ever think about the physical universe is still arriving in our own conscious experience. That was my plan too, but ended watching most games so far. Awesome. At least highlights. Argentina's game is in a half an hour waiting for it. Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of fun to like follow a playoffs or something like this, and keeping up with it. It really adds more to the viewing experience and the stakes and all that. So yeah, I definitely enjoy that. That's sounds pretty fun. Are you saying truth is the same as meaning? I'm saying that our understanding of truth, or this idea of truth in general, is only appearing to us in a setting of meaning, in a meaningful setting, and it appears in such a way consciously that it feels objective, right? It feels real. And this is what we talk about in the perception video, why things would feel real to us. It feels like it's separate from our subjective experience. It feels like the meaning is out there in the real world, in the physical world. So, all right. How I remember my classical intuitions was erased after I became familiar with QM. Notion of mind-independent reality started to look less real. Yep, I got there through, I don't know, I guess a mix of Jordan Peterson, Heidegger, and Brandom, and then now the science. Like the science wins out over all those other three. I guess Jordan Peterson used a lot of science, but he would do it from almost like a behavioral perspective. Now, and a metaphysical perspective. He actually did it from a metaphysical and behaviorist perspective, almost. Whereas, neuroscience and neurophenomenology can actually connect those dots. Though I guess a lot of this is still coming from phenomenology, which would still be coming from Heidegger. So Heidegger is a huge deal in terms of how I understand these things. And then the idea of like Brandom, where it's starting to connect the idea of semantics and normative social practices and stuff like that really makes it clear as to what we're doing right now when I'm speaking, and that's my words right now are sensory stimuli for your brain, and that's going to affect some activity in your brain, and it's going to affect actually what you end up remembering and what you don't remember, and it's going to affect what you end up understanding. At least if you're paying attention, as we learned earlier. Okay, I think I got to call it. We're at 2 hours and a half. I've just been popping off here. I need to give more time to this idea, and I got to see if I got to chisel it more, right? This is what AIs do all the time. Like if you don't give it much, it's just going to give you like some, whatever comes to quote unquote mind for it. And there's probably more nuance that I want to add into this. So as it keeps giving me outputs, I could keep saying, hey, I actually want this nuance, and I want this nuance, and I want this nuance. So yeah, I'll have to give it some more time. All right. Yeah, no, thanks for all the feedback here. Thanks for all the chatting. Thanks for keeping it civil in the discussions and chat. Thanks for any lurkers as well. Have a good rest.